Welcome everybody to this webinar, which we're going to talk about intro to GitOps, intro to Argo CD, and then some OSS tools, which is open source software and tools from a startup lens. Cloud Native Team and FSI is just, meaning an ISV, is to be able to introduce the world to GitOps and then Argo CD possibly, and some of the tools that some of the startups and ISVs or anyone that's new to GitOps can take some of these nuggets with them for the intro. This is just one webinar in the series of webinars that we're going to do, depending on what other people might like or whatever things, however this has been accepted. So ultimately, we're going to get started. You know me, I'm Don High, the container guy, one of the coolest container guys in the game. I live and breathe containerization. I live and breathe anything when it has to do with containers. I'm a principal engineer in ISV, which is GNI. We got a long name now, but it's all cool. Tons of certifications, as you can see, mainly a lot of the open source certifications, from all the CKSs and all of those things. I love Jenkins as well. I go back old school, and HashiCorp is one of my favorites as well. And so I got all of those from the professional Vault certs and Terraform, Vault console, because that's what DevOps is about. Having DevOps, being a DevOps engineer, which now eventually going to move over to a lot of platform engineering, which can be another webinar that we can talk about, is mainly about a lot about open source technologies, be able to put all those open source technologies together from the DevOps standpoint, and then be able to make tools that other DevOps engineers and everyone else can use from a platform engineering. So think of that name pretty soon, platform engineering. That's going to be the next level when it comes to those type of situations. Got my man with me, Bass, that we call him. He's going to be the moderator. Bass, you want to talk about yourself?
Yeah, I'm also in the ISV and Digital Native Center of Excellence with Don, and I'm happy to be your moderator today. I'm on the Cloud Native internal V team as well, virtual team. So that's part of why I'm here, and I'm just happy to help out.
My man, Bass. Appreciate it, moderating it. Now, I'm going to let one of my coworkers, Erica, she's always up on her game, probably one of the coolest PMs as well on our team. She's going to explain what we do in ISV a little bit. Erica, you got it.
No problem. Thanks. So my name is Erica Mulatto. I'm a program manager, also on the same team, our ISV and Digital Native Center of Excellence, based in New York City. Just wanted a level set on our team and a couple of the programs. Who are we all up? So we're an organization within Microsoft under the customer experience umbrella, who really is chartered with powering our ISV, or independent software vendors, and digital native customers in accelerating their journey on Azure. So we provide technical advisory expertise, but we're also hoping to leverage our expertise of working with customers such as startups and ISVs, because we know it's a unique experience, especially in getting on Azure. So a couple of things that we have expertise on, as evidenced by this webinar today, is cloud native technology, helping customers build their platform as a SaaS product, multi-tenancy, cross-cloud applications. We're also experts in AI. So we look forward to possibly leading more content such as this to help you in your journey. And we're here to just deliver success to the customer and deliver success to our platform as well. Handing the mic back to you, Don.
All good. Appreciate it. Like I said, Erica, one of the coolest go-getters in the game and on our team. Definitely glad to have her here. This is what we're going to go to for today. This is the agenda. This is all we're going to talk about. We're going to talk intro to DevOps, because we can't talk about GitOps unless we came from its cousin and where it came from DevOps standpoint, which we're going to have a brief intro on that as well. And then we're going to have an intro on GitOps. And then we're going to have an intro to Argo CD, breaking that down, why Argo CD is cool, why I think it's cool. And then we're going to have some OSS GitOps tools, if you're very new to Argo and GitOps and Argo CD, to be able to get you started quickly. That I found that, hey, I love this OSS tool, the CLI. And I tell anyone, if we're going to start GitOps from scratch, I'll definitely would use these tools to be able to make those things happen. Let's get started, right? Let's get started and say, hey, we all know what DevOps is, right? Let's talk about DevOps. DevOps is a term that we hear more in the enterprises with phases. This is what we do, DevOps, and we use DevOps tools and all of these things about DevOps operations. But in reality, DevOps is a culture. We think of DevOps as a culture, and it requires a change in mindset. Tools often associated with CI, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. And I'm going to break all these down next on some next slides, which are practices. But it also is synonymous with infrastructure as code. And infrastructure as code from a DevOps standpoint is really what you really want, because you can do it from a declarative standpoint. You can put it inside Git, which we're going to talk about, to be able to stand up a lot of your infrastructure and be able to monitor it, your infrastructure, and deploy it when we need to deploy it real fast and quickly again, as you can see from the process, you can see from the slides. And I understand what DevOps is, because I used to be that developer, a hardcore developer, and we used to get into it with a lot of the operations team, because we used to always say, hey, it worked on our machine, it worked on our machine, it worked on our machine. And then the operation guy like, nah, y'all missing something, you're missing assembly. So in reality, that situation became a problem, because everyone was placing the blame, and we was up all night, 3, 4, 5 a.m. in the morning, because someone missed assembly on the server and they didn't get the packages, and everyone blamed each other, right? What I'm saying? As you can see from the collaboration, you can see from the code, the continuous integration, the deployment, the monitoring, and the plan, and then you have the tools all together, and that's what you consider something like a DevOps culture. And we have guys on our team that's really breaking down a lot of DevOps, and we have it can break down to full-blown sessions and talk about from change management to everything about that. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when I talk about from a DevOps standpoint, I can't talk about that without talking about continuous integration in the 3 practices that Ari talked about, which we're going to talk about what makes continuous integration good, as well as the continuous delivery as well. And then something that a lot of people don't talk about, which a lot of people confuse, is called CDP. And that's mainly a Jenkins term as well. Not really a Jenkins term, but I learned that term years ago from a Jenkins standpoint, because many people kind of confuse the continuous delivery versus continuous deployment. And I'm going to kind of break a lot of those aspects of it down, those terms. Now, CI, we already know what CI is, right? CI is, we say, a automatic process, and this process allows you to check the completeness of applications in code. Every time a member makes a change, you verify must be done, right? Verification must be done as quickly as possible. As you can see from the great graphic here, you push the code from the source code, and then once you push the code from the source code, then you have something called a pull request, and then everything from a pull request, and then you build something, and then you have something called an artifact. That artifact then gets pushed. That artifact, after you build everything, you test it, and then you have that artifact, and then you continuously do that quick feedback and say, hey, this is not good, it passed the integrations, it did everything it needs to, and then that's the loop. And that's what you got from a continuous integration standpoint. This is gonna, regardless if you do GitOps or any type of aspect in containers, this part will never change, because you're always going to need to be able to deploy, build your code, build that image, and then which we're going to break down, and then that image there's still going to need to be stored somewhere, which that image is definitely going to eventually be an artifact, and then that's how you get continuous integration. Now, we're going to break it down a little bit more, and then we're going to move this over to now continuous delivery. Once the integration, this is very important, once this integration gets completed, the next step with this integration is to deploy the application either automatically into one or more non-productive environments, which is called staging, UAT, wherever you want to go. Now, this is where it differs from a lot of people. When people think continuous delivery and continuous deployment is kind of the same, in reality, and it gets kind of tricky, because it becomes wordplay, meaning that many people have different explanations and different descriptions of what continuous delivery is. But for this, we're going to say continuous delivery is going to be, hey, if you look from the graphic, you're going to say, hey, you push the code. Once you push that code to your SCM, which is source code management, Git, GitOps, GitHub, GitLab, ADO, Azure DevOps, any aspect of it is going to be able to do it. Once you have pushed the code, you have your continuous integration, you build, you do that, everything, you have the quick feedback loop, then you build that artifact. Then that artifact definitely gets pushed automatically into staging, possibly acceptance testing, and then eventually it allows you to manually push into production after you checked everything from staging, acceptance testing, and everything. And that's what we call continuous delivery. Now, keep in mind, from that aspect of continuous delivery, you're going to have something that an artifact that needs to be published. That artifact needs to be something like whatever you do. It could be a Helm chart. And we're going to talk about that package. What did we do? Now, and we're talking about containers right now, but this can be anything. It could be Node.js. It could be .NET. It could be anything that you possibly want to know, but whatever needs to be an artifact. So then that artifact can be continuously delivered to one or more staging, UAT, accepting testers. And then after everyone says that, and then we go into production. Now, any aspects on that? Now, and if you have anything to talk about or any questions you need to have, just hit up the moderator. He'll get with me and we can talk about some of this and we can just discuss some of these slides while we go. Now, the next level of the game is something that we call continuous deployment. This is where the continuous deployment is extension of CD, but this time the process that automates the whole entire pipeline. From the moment developer commits it, their code to deployment into production through all the steps. Now, this is something that needs to be, you have to have the maturity of your organization, because this means that, hey, you believe in your full pipeline, you believe in your rollbacks, you believe in everything from a maturity standpoint that, hey, if we push this code and we have this pull request, that we can go through all of the stages and go straight to production. Now, if you have the maturity of that, then that's fine, that's more of a lifestyle change, I'd say, to a lot of customers. Hey, are you about that life, as we say, right? So that's very, very important. Now, but the only thing that you see difference between continuous delivery and also the continuous deployment is the auto between the accepting, testing, and the production, because we believe in our rollback system. And then that rollback is what we believe in. Now, here is a DevOps container lifestyle loop, right? This is what we do from a lifestyle loop, as you can see, as a developer come in. We have a developer right here. This developer is building the code. The code is here. Then first thing you need to do is in the loop. We have everything that we need to do from the CI pipeline. Basically, we have to do this manual. It'd be a Docker build or Docker container build or Docker container run after you do the git push. Once that's being said, that loop then comes in, and then, hey, we pushes this to Azure DevOps or GitHub or GitLab or wherever your CI is or your source code management is, but long as it's going to be having Git. Here's a container lifestyle that I like to talk to about to many of my customers, and this container lifestyle is exactly where things that needs to go. Now, after we push it to that, now we have the build stage. This build stage can be anything. It can be multi-stage builds. It could be single build stages. It can be tons of things that's happening in your build stage. This is where a lot of their, and we can talk about security, AKS security or Kubernetes security. This is where you do things like Trivy, from AquaSec, and check out your images. Make sure that you're scanning your images. Also making sure the pipeline multi-stage build, you're doing the smallest artifact inside your Docker containers or whatever your container Docker images are. And then we're going to push that into something which is called the registry. Now, that registry can be anything. That registry can be Artifactory. That registry can be ACR, our Azure Container Registry, ACR. It can be another open source tool called Harbor. It could be Quay.io. It could be GitHub Registry. Wherever you have your images at, this is where that artifact that needs to be tagged correctly. And once that artifact is tagged correctly, you got to have a great tagging system, which is the GitHub SHA and everything about it, if it's staging or build. And then you want to be able to have as many tags as you want, because that's free. And then that's going to get pushed to your registry. Now, once that gets pushed to your registry, then you're going to need some type of trigger. This trigger is going to be a webhook or anything that needs to happen. And then that's going to have something called a release pipeline, possibly, if we're talking Azure DevOps. Or it can be not only release pipeline, it could be a GitHub action, or it can be a GitLab Circle CI runner. It could be whatever needs to happen. But that release pipeline needs to be able to say, hey, once this artifact gets pushed to the registry, and then that artifact then needs to have the right tag. Once that tag said, hey, this is what this artifact is, then we push this into your release pipeline, and then that release pipeline can go into one of our services for containers, either Azure Container Apps, which is one of our newest hot products, or it could be AKS products using things like tons of things when we're talking about infrastructure as code, and we're talking about containerization. And you can use straight YAML manifest, great. Or you can use something called Grafana Tanker, which is something with JSONnet in it, or we can use JSONnet itself, or you can use Customize, or we can use Helm. All of these are very hot products that if you're doing Kubernetes at a high level, your pipeline, especially inside ISV, because in ISV, like you said, in ISV, we like to be cloud agnostic because many of our customers wants to be in multi-clouds. If it's AWS, if it's GCP, if it's Azure, they want to be multi-cloud. So what they're going to do, they want to do a lot of open source projects. They want to use a lot of templating. And that's when you have things like Customize, who does the Customize is a great templating tool that you want to be able to use patches and use them in YAML. And then you have Helm, which everyone loves Helm, which is great for templating as well. Helm charts that you can use. And then you have something like Grafana Tanker that uses a lot of, which is actually a new product that I love as well, that allows you to do multiple environments and patches as well, but it's based off JSONnet. And then you have the old faithful YAML. I'm gonna tell you what I am these days. I'm a customized guy until the project gets complicated, and then I'll move to a templating system. I moved away from Helm because Helm has a problem understanding YAML, meaning that your templates can get out of hand if you don't put the right spaces. And I had a lot of trouble troubleshooting a lot of Helm charts that I created because of spacing and a lot of things, because Helm really doesn't know YAML. Now, I love Customize because Customize is all about YAML. And then you can have, after you have your base file, you have everything that you need to do, and then you can have your patches and everything that you possibly want to do, and that gives you a lot of the YAML that needs to happen. That's why I love Customize. Now, if I need to do something majorly complex, and I want to do a lot of templating with verbals and everything like that, I would use something called Grafana Tanker, which is really, really great product, and it's pretty hot, and it does a lot of great things. So if you guys want to check that out, that's pretty cool. Now, once that's into production, we move it back, and then we have that cycle. And that's what we call a DevOps containerization pipeline from Azure DevOps or GitHub. But this method is a push method. So this allows us to go to the next level. Now, this push method has been gone from the dawn of time. App services use this push method. ASP.NET, Python, anything that uses this push method. The problem with a push method is, what if you have multiple environments? Say if I had 7 environments, I had environments that need to be in sync in Asia, EMEA, East US, West US, and I have 7 clusters that need to be environment. Now, this push method can become a problem because that means I have 7 clusters that needs to be in sync. Now, the push method falls back because now you have something called cluster drift. This cluster drift can be a problem because now one of your clusters can had a different image in, and you got to go see, hey, you got a spreadsheet or you got something to say, oh, what image is this cluster running? The cluster drift can get enormous, and now 3 or 4 of your clusters are out of sync, possibly because it's a push method, and then you won't know it again until you push again into the registry or use your code. That's when the main topic comes into play. This is when you have something called GitOps. And GitOps is that we're going to talk about, and this is what the newest craze is. And if you're not doing GitOps, from a container standpoint, I think you're going to be behind the curve. Most customers who doing Kubernetes at a high level is using GitOps, and GitOps is going to be the way to keep those aspects in sync, and it's going to get over that cluster drift that we talked about. And that cluster drift is very, very important. The more, if you're an ISV, or the more that you're in startup mode, you have different environments, because you want your customers to always be in sync, and you have, and it doesn't matter which cloud that you're in, you can keep those in sync. Now, GitOps is characterized by the best practice across deployment, management, monitoring of containerized apps. Now, what I loved about this GitOps, because you're using the best of Kubernetes to help you control Kubernetes and help you monitor Kubernetes and help you manage Kubernetes. What's more better than use Kubernetes? Because if y'all know Kubernetes itself, it's all about that engine, the reconciliation loop, all of those aspects. If you don't know the controllers, in which we're going to talk about. What else I love about GitOps is the developer-centric experience, manage the application, fully automated pipelines using Git, which is very, very great. You have your IDEs, you have your build, which we talked about, Git, and then you have your SCM, which is your source code management, which is your single point of truth. That single point of truth is going to be what you're going to be needing to be able to keep your clusters up to date. Now, if you see on the right-hand side, you see the great aspects of Kubernetes GitOps. You see the deployment, the clusters, the apps. You see the monitoring, the tracing, the logging, the observability, which you can use, which we have tons of products, Prometheus, Grafana, logging, Loki, which is great for logging, Elk Stack, F Stack. All of these things is logging on FluentD, is about the observability that you can control. And then you have the management of the operations. So now you're using Git to revise the infrastructure, the runtime environment, everything that you need to do. And you can do that all from a pull request. And I don't have to worry about pushing it. Then we got to say, what does Git address? What problems does it? Remember, we talked about that push method that it talked about. That can be a problem, right? Now we're talking about the deployment by hand anti-pattern. We talked about that as well from when we talked about CI from CD personally, where we had to manually push that to production manually because we wasn't mature enough to be able to say, hey, we wasn't mature in our rollback scheme, or what needs to rollback, or progressive rollback, or progressive delivery. We didn't have all of that. Also, the state in the spreadsheet anti-pattern, meaning that it can be anything, anywhere. Okay, this cluster has this image in it. This cluster has this image in it, regardless if it's in a spreadsheet, a database, wherever it needs to go. That's also an anti-pattern. Also, the deployment pipeline created by GUI's anti-pattern. Let's say before Azure pipelines came into play, a lot of people used a lot of UI inside Azure pipelines before they went to code pipelines, Jenkins files, before they went to any of those pipelines. Circle CI, been doing it for years, GitLab, all these aspects, GitHub Actions. Before that happened, even Jenkins itself had the nice UI, and then they went to the Blue Ocean UI to be able to do that before they came with the Jenkins file. Now, you don't address that anywhere no more now, because that's an anti-pattern, and you can use infrastructure as code, as well as you can use Azure pipelines, GitHub Actions, everything from a code standpoint, declarative standpoint. Now, we got to ask ourselves, how does GitOps help us? It helps us easily. Single source of truth. That's what we want. The single source of truth, desired state of the system. History, audit trail, changes made to that source. Now, we're looking at it now because it is that source that needs to change. And we have the SCM, whatever your SCM, it's going to have all of that history. Now you have the means of recording all approval. So of course, in anything you go into production, you're going to need that pull request. And then that pull request needs to be used. And then in reality, nothing should ever goes into the cluster. No one should have crew control rights into the cluster, nothing, because without going through some type of pull request. Your pipeline should be the single point of truth into the cluster. Now, a platform engineering person might can have it, just in case that they need to go in there and do some things. But from a standpoint of eventually platform engineering, or eventually anything from the best DevOps practices, no one should have crew control rights to your cluster. Your RBAC should be handled, and then that RBAC should control how your cluster is even accessed. Now, the control loop, which is that reconciliation loop, is what ensures that actual state is in line with the desired state. So if you look back at it, you're looking at it, that action state and that desired state is what you want to be able to say. So I can look at it and say, hey, here is my desired state, and here is my actual state. That sounds familiar because that's what Kubernetes does. So if I have a pod or I have a deployment, and that deployment, I need to up the replicas of that deployment, what I'm going to do is going to change that deployment replicas to 5. And then that reconciliation loop, the controller manager that's inside of the control plane is going to look at that and say, oh, we need to be 5 pods. And that's when you have that reconciliation loop. You can't have Kubernetes without that controller or the reconciliation loop, the controller manager. And that's where that comes from. Now, here is a great GitOps flow, which we kind of looked at as well. Here, you're going to ensure that the platform infrastructure tools are running. You got that infrastructure team. GitOps operator, we're going to talk about that. The development team, everything pushing to the Git looks at that GitOps operator. Now, we're looking at it from the GitOps operator. That operator is basically what we call something called a controller manager. That operator is a controller. Now, you think of an operator as a controller with a specific job. So if you ever did Kubernetes, you have certain controllers. You have deployments, you have stateful sets, you have replica sets, you have all of these things that's controllers, right? You think of an operator as a controller, but it is application specific. So you can have this controller, this operator, it has to be a controller that manages Git. So it's like a Git controller, Git operator. So what it does is basically, this is what it's doing behind the scenes. It Git clones it. It fetches that. It gets the latest version. It changes it. It discovers the manifest. And basically, then it does a kube control apply -F on the folder or whatever you need to do, what it needs to happen. And then that's going to make sure that it actually deploys deployment by applying all the discovered manifests to the cluster. Now, this is what happens. And inside of that, you using that reconciliation loop. So what that does is now it's giving you the best of Kubernetes to control Kubernetes. Now, it went from a push model until we have a pull model. So now let's go back to the scenario when I had 7 clusters across the world. These 7 clusters then monitors my mono repo. This mono repo has all of my servers on it. This mono repo have each one of my servers manifest. I have one that says south. I have one that says north. I have whatever stage environment it is. And then if we do a pull request in one of those environments, what's going to happen is, hey, now my actual state and my desired state is going to always match, because now I have a Kubernetes operator, which is like that controller manager, and that controller manager then actually say, oh, this changed, this YAML changed, so now let's pull that into the cluster, and now I don't have cluster drift because now my actual state and my desired state is always going to be ready to go at the same time. Now, that's the big GitOps flow. Now, we break it down to some of the major GitOps operators. We can't talk about GitOps until we talk about company that coined the word GitOps. Flux from WeWorks actually was one of the companies that coined the word GitOps. But many people's been doing GitOps forever, right? You know, that's not a problem. Many people's been doing GitOps forever. They've been looking at GitOps forever. But Flux is one of the first companies to jump on GitOps. And then Jenkins X came about, but Jenkins X didn't really blow up, but it's still around and it's still been updated. If you're a fan of Jenkins, you might want to look at Jenkins X. And then you have one that's really hot, that's really blowing up, is Argo CD. Now, I tell everyone this, and this is something that I tell even teams inside Microsoft. You're only as hot as your adoption. So if you're adopted and you support it and you're part of the CNCF, you're going to be adopted. Now, if you look at Argo and Flux, these are adopted products. If you look at the CNCF and then you look at projects that's in the various stages in CNCF, and then you see incubating projects, and then you see projects that's graduated. You'll see some of these already graduated. Kubernetes graduated. Prometheus graduated. Just recently, Service Mesh, Istio graduated. Linkerd, all of these projects are graduated. That means you're going to be supported. That means everyone's on board. That means that many major companies is using these projects. And what's bleeding the block right now is Argo CD. Many of my customers, and I've been doing this for a while, some of them use Flux if they want to use the AKS add-on, but most of them wants to use Argo CD because Argo CD has a great ecosystem. Now, what's Argo CD? I love Argo CD because it's declarative. It's GitOps. It's continuous integration. It's a tool. It manages the Kubernetes resources in the Git repository. It continuously monitors running application and comparing their live state and their desired state. Basically, what GitOps is all about. It reports the deviations between the visualizations and help developers manually or automatically sync the live state and desired state. So if you want to sync it, it's a couple ways you can do it. So if you're still used to the old push model, you actually can do that in Argo CD as well, because that means you can push from a CD standpoint. You still can push a button and say, hey, let's sync this up. And Argo CD will allow you to do that. Now, we also say, why use Argo CD? I love Argo CD because, and I love any GitOps basically, but what I really love about Argo CD because it allows you to achieve all of that about your Kubernetes pipelines inside that operator, because it extends the benefits of all your specification. It looks at your GitOps configuration management. It also looks at the monitoring. So you can monitor things inside Argo CD, analytics, the automation. It does all of that. That's what I love it. But also, if you want to bring this into major, say FSI or any financial institution, you can also have RBAC and single sign-on and anything that you possibly want to do. So that means that it's enterprise friendly. So you got to use things that's enterprise friendly as well as do the ISVs and the startups as well to give everybody approach. And that's what Argo CD does. Now, how does it work? Argo CD works because it follows the GitOps pattern. We talked about it. Once it follows that pattern, then all they got to make sure that, hey, that my live state and my actual state are always synced between the different environments. So you have your target deployment environments, you have everything that needs to happen, and that's what you get. It also automates everything, which we talked about. Argo CD also supports the tools that we talked about. YAML, Customize, Helm charts, and even JSON.NET as well. So if you have any artifacts or anything that changes inside of your repository, what will happen is it will allows that repository to see the changes. And then Argo CD's operator, AKA the controller with a specific job, is monitoring that. So and Argo CD's monitoring is every 3 minutes, but you can also change that to however you want to monitor it. And you can also sync it as well. Now, let's talk about how Argo is architecture. I love Argo's architecture because it's just like Kubernetes. So you have the API server that's similar to Kubernetes because everything talks to the API server, kind of like the Kube API inside of Kubernetes, because it follows their best practices. So the web UI talks to it, Argo events, all the CI/CD systems. The API server is responsible for the following. It manages the applications and reporting back to their statuses. It triggers the set of operation application. It manages the Git repositories for the Kubernetes clusters. It manages the authentication, single sign-on support, and it also manages the RBAC. That's what API server does. And then you have the next part of that's major is something called the repository server. The main responsibility of the repository server is to maintain the local cache of the Git repository holding the application manifest. Other Argo services make applications to the repository service in order to get Kubernetes manifest, Helm charts, customized YAML, whatever. You can do it based on URL. You can do it based on Git revisions. You can do it on application paths. You can do templated specific settings from Helm chart values, JSON.NET files, and everything like that. And then you have one of the main operators inside Argo, which is the actual application controller. Now, that application controller is what continuously observes the live state of the application. We talked about that. You can't have GitOps unless you have some type of controller that's running inside of your Kubernetes cluster. So whenever there is a drift in the state and they're not in sync, that controller will fix it. It will match the current state and the desired state. And the final responsibility is execute any user-defined hooks and lifecycle events that we're going to talk about. And that's what Argo does. So in order for any of those changes, Argo is going to make those things happen. Now we're going to see, hey, how can Argo be installed? I love Argo. It's simple to install. You can start with a Helm chart, but I'm all about automation and I'm all about tools. So I love the great tools that can install Argo. Now, Argo can be installed in many ways. YAML, manifest, customize, Helm charts, and OSS CLI tools. And I'm all about OSS tools. So a great engineer made a CLI called Arcade. And I want you guys to Google Arcade. It's a great CLI tool. It's an open source marketplace for developer tools. And Arcade have all the coolest open source projects in it that you can use to automate with. And it's a CLI tool that helps it install inside your cluster. It has Argo CD to be installed. That's a great tool to be able to install Argo CD that I would love, that I would mention, and I would use that. But a lot of customers say, okay, we love the tool, but how do we set up our repository? How do we set up our folder structure? How do we do all that? That's when the next tool come in. The Argo CD team itself built a tool called Argo CD Autopilot CLI. And this is created by the Argo team for onboarding GitOps and Argo CD. So Arcade allows you to install Argo CD, but it doesn't help you with the infrastructure. So I will use Arcade to bootstrap the cluster as well as other things if I want to be able to bootstrap the cluster. So if I want to bootstrap the cluster with Terraform, Crossplane, Ansible, Puppet, Chef, anything I want to bootstrap the cluster, then I would need a configuration manager, which is able to run that. And then that when Arcade comes in and install everything I need to do, or I can use Argo to do as well. Now, Autopilot is great because not only that Autopilot installs Argo, it also gives you a folder structure for you to start with. So new users of GitOps and Argo CD are not sure how to design their repos and add application, promote applications across environments, and manage the Argo CD installations itself. Now, Autopilot, I love it. It's a tool which offers opinionated. I don't mind opinionated ways if the opinions is part of some of the best practices. Now, and what opinions did you want is someone who created the tool that have great opinions of how fresh off of GitOps to be able to install it. Argo CD Autopilot saves the operator's time by installing it, managing your apps using GitOps. It provides a clear structure for how your applications are to be added, updated, all that from Git. It's pretty cool, right? Creating simple patterns for making updates for application promoting across the different environments. Argo CD Autopilot allows that. And it also enables better disaster recovery because we all know we also want that business continuity and disaster recovery. That's what we all strive for, and that's what we need to put in any major Kubernetes production. So it allows that to be able to spin up the whole Argo CD, all disaster recovery, everything for just a repo with disaster recovery, and that's what Argo CD Autopilot does. Now, getting started with Autopilot is simple. I love it. Pretty straightforward. If you go to the Argo CD Autopilot, read the docs, installation guide, it's pretty straightforward. And it tells you everything that you possibly need and possibly want. Then you need to have a repo. You need to have a Git token, just like in Jenkins, just like you do anything else. So the Autopilot can read those environments, and that's what happens. Then you just go in there, set up your environment variables. You set them environment variables up. What you need to do, you export them. You have your kubeconfig. You can't talk to Kubernetes without a kubeconfig file, or you can have something like kubedns, or you can have something, one of my favorite is K9S that I use, a great tool. And then you set your environment variables for that session. Set your Git token. You set your repo, everything you need. And then you just say Argo CD Autopilot repo bootstrap. What that does then is doing all the cool things behind the scenes. It's installing Argo. It's installing Argo CD itself. It's bootstrapping the cluster. It's giving you a structure that you possibly want to do. And then what it does then, it allows you to do something called apps of apps pattern, which we're going to talk about. Now, you can port forward it, which is one of the ways you can do it, or you can go in there, change the config file, the config map inside of it, and give you an ingress controller, Nginx, HA proxy, whatever your great ingress controller. And then we go to that, and then boom, we're ready to go. Localhost 80, and then you're going to be able to see the admin portal. Now, syncing up. Argo CD synchronization principles is very major because what it does is allows you to sync. So you have pre-sync stages. I love these stages because this sync is what Argo loves. So if you want to have any action that needs to be done before the sync phase, you can do it. So if you want to run a Kubernetes job, typical example would be something like a database migration. If you have a database migration and you need to run first the migration, boom, run the Kubernetes job. You can do what you need to do, and that's what a pre-sync stage from. Then you have something like sync hook. And the sync hook is for when you want to sync things like the rolling update, blue, green, canary releases, which Argo also has something called Argo rollouts as well, that you want to use the Argo suite of tools, Argo events, Argo rollout, Argo CD, all of these Argo events is what you really need for the whole Argo suite. And then you have your post sync. The post sync hook is to be able to run those health checks, do all the deployments, do a tweet, whatever you want to do for everything that needs to happen. Now, setting up, creating, testing Argo CD or anything that you want to do is easy in Argo CD. What it allows you to do is say, hey, here's your project. You do Argo CD Autopilot project. So Argo is based on terms. A project is a term that's going to have all your projects in it. And inside a project, you can have something called applications. And each one of your applications is one of your environments that can look at a repo that you need. And that's kind of the terms that we talk about. Argo projects, Argo applications, and that's what you need to do. See, if you look at it from right there, you see Argo Autopilot project, create testing. Then we can go to Autopilot, create Hello World app. And then the app, and then you create the same Hello World app based on whatever project you use, and you can have everything. And then that's when Argo have something called the apps of apps pattern. And the apps of apps pattern is a powerful application pattern that gives you the declarative way to be able to manage multiple apps. So how Don Hyde, the container guy, bootstrap his cluster is using either Terraform or Crossplane to build, then bootstrap it with Argo CD and then point Argo CD into my repo and then using the apps of app pattern. And then it's gonna, I have a project called infra, a project called mainly apps. And then what that does is gonna allow Argo to be able to manage your cluster by bootstrapping with the apps of apps pattern. And that's where many of the customers, major customers, a lot of large ISVs, large startups, large container customers, because if you're a container company, you're going to need to do container aspects. So everything that you're going to be doing is going to be built about cloud native. If it's going to be AKS, if it's going to be GCP, GKE, if it's going to be EKS, if it's going to be Azure Container Apps, it's always got to be cloud native and use something like Argo CD to be able to push that application and be able to go to the next level. Now, we only got about 5 minutes left. If you guys need anything, raise your hand. We can talk about it. We can have a discussion. We can do anything that we possibly want to do. And hey, like I said, I'm a big fan of Argo because what Argo does is it allows a lot of great aspects of it. Now, you can see one of my favorite aspects of Argo is, here is the repo that Argo from making that. You see the apps pattern, right? So what Argo do, if you look at from my GitHub pattern, basically what I did is you had the apps pattern, right? This apps is going to be your apps of apps pattern. So this is going to have my hello worlds that I made in there, right? It's going to have everything broken down. So anything that's inside of this folder is going to get installed by an application. And you can read all of that from apps of apps pattern. And then you can say the hello world. And then basically, if you see the base pattern, you see something that this is the customized file. This customized file is broken down to, hey, here's your resources that needs to be happening. And this resources is coming from this customized file. And then you have something called on the top, if you have overlays, And the overlays is going to have the customized file that's going to say, hey, here's the overlays that needs to happen. And that's how customized work to be able to do that. And that's how Argo CD work. If you can see, this is one of the best practices you can do it, and it's opinionated. So if you want to be able to say, you know, I don't understand GitOps, or I love GitOps, but I don't know where to start. Look at the slides, look at these, get Argo CD Autopilot, tell it to your customers, because that can jumpstart those, your customers in what we're trying to do from that aspect and be able to make those things happen. As you can see, it built a great project for me. It did everything that I want to do. So I don't have to worry about, now I just got to worry. Now, in Argo CD Autopilot, now I can have different projects. I can have, inside these projects, I can have different projects, different YAML, different environments. So now I can have staging, I can have EMEA, I can have everything. And then what's going to happen is when Argo does this situation, that's what's going to happen. Now, if you look at now, you know, this is one of my best. I'm a big K9S guy because I'm an open source guy. So if we go to, you know, we go to namespaces and then we go to Argo CD inside here, you can see that Argo CD, everything that we talked about is what happens. You have your application controller that we have in Argo. We have, you know, you have the Dex controller, which actually looks at, you know, Argo CD, and then also have the notification controller that says, hey, here's the notification that needs to happen. Here is the Redis cache. And what this Redis cache allows us to do is maintain some of the state inside of it, right? Then you have your repo server, right? That repo server is what's going to be able to, which we talked about earlier, it's going to be able to, you know, manage your Git, right? Manage your Git repositories and everything that you want to do from that repo servers. And then you have the application server itself, right? Now, if I want to go in here now and say, let's see, you know, maybe if I got, see, I got a couple minutes left. Maybe if I go here and I go here and I say, I want to go here, you know, and say, basically I port forward it right here. And if I go port forward and I say, I want, you know, let's go, what we got? Let's go. Local host. This is the coolest thing about Argo CD right here. This Argo CD right here allows us to have what's in sync. And as you can see, I did the hello world, right? Those Argo CD world, hello worlds, you can see, boom, everything inside of it. You can have simple service, your deployments, everything that I see, and to tell you the sync is okay, the sync is not okay. Argo also have what we have as a, you know, multi-tenancy. Yeah, right. So if we can talk, you want to talk about multi-tenancy, we can talk about that way. You can do it with either possibly Capsule, or we can do it actually also with, you know, my great, what I love to use multi-tenancy, you know, virtual cluster, vCluster. So vCluster is great for multi-tenancy as well. And if you did vCluster as well, it's going to be able to work. You got to understand that this is just an operator that's running, and then an operator makes those things happen.
Don, we got a couple of questions. First of all, great presentation. I think everybody's enjoyed it so far and learned a lot. A couple of questions from attendees.
Okay.
The first is around support.
Okay.
Can you talk to the Microsoft support story as far as Argo CD, and are we working with vendors like Arcuity and other vendors, or are we supporting it just at the open source project level? And kind of what's the Microsoft support position here?
Well, Microsoft should, you know, and I'm just going to keep it real. Because I like to keep things real. Microsoft jumped on the Flux train, right? So with them jumping on the Flux train, their Flux add-on is part of that, right? Our job as ISV in the community is help, you know, get Microsoft to understand that, hey, we need support with Argo CD because that's where you're going and you only house your projects, and we need the support for Argo CD. But Argo CD, we don't have a support story right now for Argo CD because you have to install it inside your cluster, unfortunately. But the problem, like I said, you're only as hot as your project, you're only hot as your adoption, and Argo is adopted everywhere. So that you can go to of the creators of Argo. You can go to CodeFresh. You can tons of people who built inside the Argo project is going to give you support anywhere. Kind of like Rancher. I would never go into no production using a product if they didn't have some type of paid support for mission critical. And when it comes to that, that's what you're going to be able to need.
And with that, we are out of time. So I'd like to thank Don for you presenting. We all learned a lot from this, I think. So on behalf of Don, I have been Mike Bazarewski, your moderator, and thank you for joining us for this presentation today.